How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday special time, noon Pacific, because Nina and I are going to a wedding later. Let's light up the darkness. I gotta tell you, very excited about today's class. Going to be an intimate group, I think, but very special daf. We're going to learn something beautiful, just beautiful. Who's in the house? Karen in Northern California, Sharon in New Jersey, Shandora in the Bronx, Bella in Florida, Paul in the Great Northwest, Joseph in Massachusetts, Melissa in Great Neck, as well as Chaim in Florida, Ella, Aoife in Florida, Marjorie in Virginia, Joe in the Inland Empire. Let's do it. Okay, we're going to be, with God's help, finishing chapter 5 today here in Tractate Bava Kamma and opening chapter 6. Our daf is page 55. This is the 21st volume of the Talmud, generally talking about damages. Now, yesterday we talked a little bit about the difference between the two versions of the Ten Commandments, right? One in Exodus, right? In the book of Exodus, Torah portion Yisro, when God appears at Mount Sinai and gives us the Ten Commandments, and then again in Devarim, Deuteronomy, when Moses is sort of recapping the journeys of the children of Israel in the wilderness. And from these slight differences, we can learn out some laws and some teachings. So yesterday we were just looking about where it said about all your cattle, right? And whether the laws about your ox and your donkey can be extended to other areas. So when we're talking about not only damages with respect to a pit, if your ox or donkey falls in, but also prohibitions on working your animals on Shabbos, prohibitions on working your animals together. You don't pull a plow with an ox and a donkey beside each other, etc. And because the prohibition on working your animals on Shabbos has slightly different wording in the first version of the Ten Commandments in Exodus compared to the second in Deuteronomy, the sages were learning out some laws. So we picked this up at the bottom of page 54b, and having discussed some differences between the two versions of the Ten Commandments, the Gemara now discusses a related matter. Again, looking at the differences between these two versions of the Ten Commandments, but now having nothing to do with the law of damages. So Rabbi Hanina ben Agil asked Rabbi Chia bar Abba, for what reason is the word good not stated in the first version of the Ten Commandments, whereas in the latter version of the Ten Commandments, in the context of the mitzvah, the commandment to honor one's parents, the word good, tov, is stated there. So let's compare the two versions. We can take a moment and compare the two versions of the Ten Commandments on this matter. So this is in the commandment to honor one's parents, which is already an interesting commandment because it's the fifth commandment. And we understand that there were two tablets, and the first tablet is understood to be the laws between God and humankind. And the second is the laws between humans and each other, right? So we see, and really the Ten Commandments, which includes a commandment of Shabbos, is not the Noahide commandments, which apply to all people. These are understood to be the commandments that bind the Jewish people. But we can certainly learn out from the Ten Commandments all manner of principles that certainly do apply to all people. At any rate, the first tablet, right, so is I am God, you shall have no other gods before me, you'll not make graven images, etc. You'll keep Shabbos, right, so something God tells us to do. We're keeping Shabbos in honor of God. And then on the second tablets, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, bear false witness, covet, etc. So those are obviously laws between people. But on that first set, the fifth commandment is honor your parents. Now, you might have thought that honoring the parents would belong on the second tablet, since it's a commandment between people, right? I'm a person, my parents are a person, right? Are people, so that it feels like it's something that we need to do between people, not between us and God. But it is on the first tablet. And it makes sense, right? If God is not appearing to us in our lives the way God was manifest explicitly on Mount Sinai to our ancestors, but it's an unbroken chain, right? The Jews that were present at Mount Sinai shared what they learned, their love of God, their fear of God, their awe of God, the commandments they were given with their children who grew up and had kids, and etc. Right? So the unbroken chain goes through our parents back to Mount Sinai. So there's some logic to it in that sense. At any rate, let's read the commandment to honor your father and mother. So here in Exodus, the version in Exodus, the fifth commandment goes like this: Kabed es avicha ve'es amicha, right? So honor your father and your mother. Imecha leman ya'arichun yamecha al ha'adama asher Hashem Elokecha nasan lach, right? So honor your mother and your father so that your days will be lengthened upon the land that Hashem your God gives you. So interestingly, that honoring the parents, even in the first set, is tied directly to lengthening our days in the Holy Land, right? Lengthening the time that the sovereign nation of Israel will exist in the land of Israel. Now, the second version, so that's, of course, that was a verse, chapter 20, verse 12 in Exodus. Now we go over to Deuteronomy, chapter 5, verse 16. Honor your father and your mother, as Hashem your God commanded you. So now we're adding, as Hashem your God commanded you, compared to the first version of it. And that kind of makes sense because Moses is now recapping what happened to the children of Israel during their journeys in the wilderness. So now that he's mentioning the 10 commandments, but he could have said this in any of the commandments, right? Honor your God, or have no other gods before God, as God commanded you. Or you shall not murder, as God commanded you. But Moses places it here. Honor your father and your mother, as Hashem your God commanded you. Then, what it said the first time, so that your days will be lengthened. And then here's another addition. And so that it will be good for you upon the land that Hashem your God gives you. So there's something about honoring your mother and your father. It's father first. So honor your father and your mother. And the first time, was also honor your father and your mother. The first time is honor your father and your mother so that your days will be lengthened upon the land that Hashem your God gives you. And the second time, honor your father and your mother as Hashem God commanded you so that your days will be lengthened and so that it will be good for you. Right? So kabed esi avicha ve'esi mecha, honor your father and your mother, ka'asher tzivcha Hashem Elokecha, as God commanded, as Hashem your God commanded you, leman ya'arichun yamecha, ve'ulema'an, right? So that your days will be lengthened, ulema'an, and so that yitav lach, right? Yitav lach, so that it will be good for you. So it's this that the sages are focusing on now, that it will be good for you. That's what was added in the second set that wasn't in the first set. So what do we learn out from that? Here's an amazing discussion, and we're going to add to it from some later commentators that I think really help us to understand it. Right, so Rabbi Chanina ben Agil asked Rabbi Chiya bar Abba, for what reason is the word good not stated in the first version of the Ten Commandments, whereas in the latter version of the Ten Commandments, in the context of the mitzvah to honor one's parents, the word good is stated there in order that it shall be good for you. Now, it's not just that good appears only in the fifth commandment, in that second set and not in the first set, but the word good doesn't exist anywhere in the Ten Commandments in the first set, and it is added in the second set here in the fifth commandment. So the Ten Commandments, when they were given by God, did not include the word good, and when they were recapitulated by Moses at the end of his life, he added the word good. So let's keep going. So Rabbi Chiya bar Abba said to him, so remember Rabbi Hanina ben Agil went to Rabbi Chiya bar Abba and asked, why was the word good added in the second version of the Ten Commandments? And Rabbi Chiya bar Abba answers, Rabbi Chiya bar Abba said to him, before you ask me why the word good is stated, ask me if the word good is actually stated there or not. Since I am not sufficiently proficient in my knowledge of the biblical verses to remember the precise wording, and I do not know if the word good is stated there or not. So, pause. What? At that time, any educated Jew basically had the entire Torah, if not the whole Tanakh, the whole Hebrew Bible, memorized. That was just standard Jewish education then. Certainly one who's not just a regular Jew, not even just a regular educated Jew, but a Jew who ends up becoming one of the sages of the Gemara would know what the wording is in the Torah. So even though you can say that Rabbi Chiya bar Abba was more focused on halacha, on Jewish law, than on Jewish Bible and midrash and you know the Agadah, the storytelling aspects, he would know. He would know what words are in the Torah and what words are not in the Torah. So what the commentators say on that point is that what he didn't know was the word good inscribed on the Ten Commandments, on the tablets themselves. In other words, is the Torah, when it says what the Ten Commandments are, even that first version, is that a direct and faithful rendition of what was actually inscribed on the tablets themselves? Right? And he wasn't sure, is there a midrash, is there some other tradition that tells us whether the word good was inscribed on the Ten Commandments themselves? And or when Moses says later what the Ten Commandments were, was he saying what was written on the second set of tablets, right? The first set of tablets were the ones that Moses smashed after the sin of the golden calf. Then he went back up on the mountain, came back with two other sets of tablets. Were the second set of tablets different than the first in terms of the wording of the commandments therein? Right? When does this change come in? Did it just come in when Moses is talking about it at the end of his life? Or was there an actual edit that God made in the tablets themselves? And that's what Rabbi Chiya bar Abba is saying, that he doesn't know. So he suggests to the guy questioning him, Rabbi Hanina ben Agil, he says to him, go to Rabbi Tanchum bar Chanilai, who was commonly found at the academy of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, who was an expert in Agadah. So perhaps he heard something from him on this matter and can answer your question. So Rabbi Hanina ben Agil went to him and asked him. And Rabbi Tanchum said to him, I did not hear anything on this matter from Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi himself. But this is what Shmuel bar Nachum, the brother of the mother of Rav Acha, the son of Rabbi Hanina, said to me. And some say it was the father of the mother of Rav Acha, the son of Rabbi Hanina. It does not mention the word good in the first tablets, since they were ultimately destined to be broken after the children of Israel made the golden calf. And the Gemara asks, well, and even if it had mentioned the word good, and they were ultimately destined to break, what of it? And Rav Ashi said, if this term had been mentioned in the first tablets, all good would have, God forbid, ceased from Israel once they were broken. Therefore, only the second version, which was written after the breaking of the tablets, contains the word good, so that there would always be good for the Jewish people. So on this, the Maharal says that what happened was the first set of tablets, which were fabricated completely by God, right? Both the writing and the tablets themselves, as opposed to the second set where God said to Moses, carve for your set a set of tablets, and then God inscribed them. So it was a partnership between God and Moses to create the second tablets. The first tablets were the ideal tablets, the ideal expression of the Ten Commandments, the ideal expression of what the relationship should be between the Jewish people and God. And the children of Israel couldn't handle it, right? We weren't up to the task. We weren't at that elevated spiritual level where we could absorb those commandments and live them. In fact, we fell short immediately. Even before Moses came down the mountain with them, there we were panicking that Moses wasn't coming back, forcing Aaron, to make this golden calf, which was not a god. The Jews didn't think that the calf would substitute for God. They thought it would substitute for Moses, whom they were panicked was lost, and this is what they were used to coming out of Egypt and the whole idolatrous world at that time, that you would have some kind of a magic figure to be an intercession between you and the divine, in this case between God and the Jewish people. Obviously, they were totally wrong, totally mistaken. It was a sin, and Moses smashed the tablet, lest God destroy the entire people. It's like Moses smashed the contract. Well, whoa, they didn't sign. Don't destroy them all, because they've done this sin of the golden calf. So they just weren't at that level. And if the word good, says the Maharal, had been included in the first set of tablets, it would have been as if God was saying, it's good if the Jews live at this level, which is a very highfalutin, spiritual level, which was beyond the capacity of the Jews. And therefore, if they couldn't live at that level, then they would never be good. And that was too much to ask. So what God said when he sent the second tablets, and according to this view, the word good was included on the second tablets themselves, God was saying, look, I understand. You're human. You are susceptible to the evil inclination. It lurks in you from your birth. You're going to fall short, but you can still attain goodness. There is still goodness in you. And that's why good is included, right? And you sort of start the process of becoming good, as it were, by learning to respect your parents. I mean, it's the easiest thing in the world to resent your parents when they're being good parents and setting boundaries and telling you what you can and can't do and constantly trying to educate you. And it's like the man, like the authority figure on your back. And so, children just often resent a little bit the control that their parents exert on them because they're being good parents and they have to do that. And as you learn that what your parents are doing to you in that authoritative manner, obviously as long as it doesn't involve abuse, is for your own good. And likewise, that's how God is with us. Often we have to be castigated, set boundaries around us. Stuff happens that we don't understand, but somehow over time we come to have that real emunah b'tachon, faith and trust in God, that everything that's happening to us is for our good, right? And so that's what we can learn. And further evidence of this is interesting. The first set of tablets, the Ten Commandments, were 172 words. In the second set, there's 189 words, right? So in addition to adding about all the cattle and the donkey and stuff, and here that Hashem your God commanded you. So there's extra words in the second set. Second set, 189 words. First, 172 words. What's the difference? 17 extra words. The number 17 corresponds to the value of tet, vav, bet, right? Tov. So the numerical value, the gematria of the word good is 17. So there's a definite, sort of strong hint that God is giving us, that, we didn't live up to that level that we might have hoped for, that God maybe hoped for us, or maybe God just knew that we could never live up to that level, that sort of angelic level of the first tablets, but that we could still attain goodness, in the human sphere in our own mortal way while we're fighting the evil inclination in order to fulfill the commandments. The 10 commandments represent all the commandments. Hiskuni also points out that in the first set of commandments, one of the Hebrew letters of the alphabet is missing, right? There are 22 letters, 21 are found in the first set of the commandments. What's the missing letter? Tet. The letter tet, which is the first letter of the word tov, good. Right? So that was left out, and then it was included in the second, as if to say that there was something missing in that first set, something missing for us, something missing from us in that partnership. That second set, which is less perfect, is nevertheless more complete, right? And now this letter tet that was missing is the subject of the continuing discussion. So Rabbi Yehoshua says, if one sees the letter tet in his dream, it is a good sign for him. Right? So the letter tet represents tov, represents good. So if you see this letter in your dream, it's a good sign for a person. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason? If we say that it is because the word good, tov, is written in the Torah and begins with the letter tet, well, then one could say instead that it is an allusion to a different verse that includes the letter tet and is definitely not suggesting something good. Isaiah 14:23, and I will sweep it with the broom. V'teticha b'mateate of destruction. I will sweep it with the broom of destruction, which also contains the letter tet several times, but is referring to punishment, not reward. So the Gemara answers, we mean that when one sees one tet in his dream, it is a good sign. So the Gemara challenges this and says that the latter statement is problematic, as even according to this explanation, one can say that a single letter tet alludes to the verse, her filthiness, tumata, is in her skirts, from Lamentation 1:9. And that begins with the letter tet. So the Gemara answers, we mean that when one sees the letter tet together with the letter bet, right? It begins in tet, ends in bet, tov, in his dream, then it is a good sign for him, as the word tov is written with both tet and bet. So the Gemara asks further, according to this, say that it alludes to the verse, her gates are sunk, taveu, into the ground, Lamentations 2:9, which begins with the letter tet followed by the letter bet. So rather, it is not merely because it is the first letter of the word good, tov, that it is considered a good omen. Since the Torah initially introduces the letter tet in a context of good, with the word good itself, right? The first time the letter tet appears in the Torah, it is to say tov, good. And that's why it's a good omen. As from the word Bereshit, the first word in the Torah, until, right in the beginning, or at the beginning of, the first word in the Torah, until the verse, and God saw that the light was good, tov, at Genesis 1:4, the letter tet does not appear, right? The letter tet does not appear in the Torah until it is used to introduce the word tov, good. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, if one sees a eulogy, hesped, in his dream, it is an illusion that in heaven they had pity, chasu, on him and saved him, pedauhu, from actually being eulogized. And the Gemara notes this statement applies specifically when he actually saw the word eulogy in writing, the word chesped in writing. So on the one hand, if you see, your funeral and people are saying nice things about you in your dream, it means that you might have flirted with leaving this world, but they saved you in heaven and you're going to last longer. But according to this other view, that's only the case. That's only a siman. It's only a sign of that, an omen, if you actually see the Hebrew word chesped. At any rate, I was quite fascinated by this idea that the Ten Commandments did not include the letter tet the first time around. They did include it the second time around, and also the word good. And good was added after, the first perfect set were broken and the second set in partnership between God and the people is the surviving one. And not only that, but it's good, right? So it gives you that sense that God, who knows everything, past, present, and future, understood that we weren't at that level, that we could, live in the ideal manner right away, as perhaps we will when Mashiach comes, but that it is within our capability to make a repair in ourselves, in our world, to elevate ourselves, to work on our musar, our traits, our attributes, and to constantly be making, that improvement in the self by wrestling with the evil urge, the evil inclination, for the sake of our love of God, Torah, the Masorah, and our parents who transmit that tradition to us. Okay, that was the digression on the Ten Commandments. Now the Mishnah, back to our Mishnah number 7, right here in, was it 7? Here, the final, Mishnah number 8, the final Mishnah here in chapter 5. The Mishnah teaches that, and similarly, undomesticated animals and birds are subject to the same laws as domesticated animals. And Reish Lakish says here, Rebbe taught a ruling from the Tosefta that illustrates the statement that birds and undomesticated animals are also subject to the prohibition of diverse kinds. Right, that in other words, you cannot plow an ox and a donkey together, and you will not breed an ox and a donkey together, or a horse and a donkey either. There are mules, but Jews don't crossbreed species of animals. You can make breeds, right? It's okay if you're a dog breeder, to enhance some attribute of a dog. So through breeding, it gets faster, bigger, smaller, redder, browner, whatever. That's within a species, but you cannot interspecies breeding. That's prohibited by the Torah, and this is going to apply to birds as well. Right, so Rebbe taught a ruling that a cock, a peacock, and a pheasant are diverse kinds with respect to each other, since this law applies to birds as well. And the Gemara asks, isn't this obvious? What novelty is stated here? And Rav Chaviva said the novelty here is because they are reared together. So lest you say, since they are reared together, they are essentially one species and not considered as diverse kinds, therefore it teaches us that they are actually separate species, and the laws of diverse kinds do apply here. You cannot interbreed them. Following the discussion of the prohibition of diverse kinds as it relates to birds, Shmuel says the domestic goose and the wild goose are diverse kinds with respect to each other and are not one species. And Rava bar Rav Hanan objects to this. What is the reason? If we say it is because the beak of this one is long and the beak of that one is short, if that is so, then with regard to a Persian camel and then an Arabian camel, where the neck of this one is thick and the neck of that one is thin, they should indeed be considered diverse kinds with respect to one another. And clearly, though, the camels are in fact two variants of a single species. And likewise, we should say the same thing about a domestic goose and a wild goose, as long as they're both geese. So rather, Abaye says that is not the reason, but rather another difference exists between the domestic goose and the wild goose concerning the male. With regard to this type, i.e. the wild goose, its testicles are visible from the outside, and with regard to that one, i.e. the domestic goose, its testicles are inside. So Rav Papa said that another difference exists between them concerning the female. This one, the wild goose, releases only one egg in its ovary and later releases another. And that one, the domestic goose, releases several eggs at once in its ovary, and consequently they are not to be considered as the same species. In connection with the prohibition of diverse kinds, Rabbi Yirmiyah says that Reish Lakish says, one who crossbreeds two species of creatures that live in the sea is flogged in transgressing the prohibition of crossbreeding diverse kinds. And it's almost like, huh? Do we breed fish? I guess there's hatcheries and fish farming and stuff now. I wonder if they were doing it back then. This sounds like almost some kind of hypothetical exercise, but maybe I am mistaken. And in fact, Tosafos cite a midrash from which it appears that fish cannot be crossbred. And the only relevant component of the prohibition relates to working two different species of fish together. Right? Because you can't work them together and you can't breed them together. So fish themselves aren't going to interbreed. How are you going to work them together? What does that mean, to work a fish? If this is correct, then the discussion in this Gemara, which clearly mentions crossbreeding, must be referring to sea creatures other than fish. One opinion cited in Tosafos suggests amending the text so that the discussion of the Gemara concerns a person who drives a wagon with two species of fish and not one who crossbreeds them. Drives a wagon? What does that mean? And you almost get this picture of, like a canal. Remember that in the old days, when they would move a barge down a canal, it was actually pulled by a mule or a donkey with a rope on it. And the donkey or the mule is walking on either side of the canal, pulling the barge. And so perhaps you could harness a fish to pull your wagon on land while the fish is swimming in the water. Very likely we're in the hypothetical realm, but still, we want to know, what would the law be? So the Gemara asks, what is the reason, i.e., where is there an allusion to this in the Torah, that you can't crossbreed fish? And Rav Ada bar Ahava said in the name of Ula, it is derived from a verbal analogy between the term, according to its species, lemenichu, Genesis 1:21, referring to animals living on dry land, and the same term, according to its species, laminehu, in Genesis 1:25, referring to sea creatures. So in the same way that the former may not be crossbred, similarly the latter may not be crossbred. And the sage Rachava, and that may well be the kind of commandment that wasn't really relevant, right, in agricultural society where they didn't have scuba divers and submarines and fish farms, etc. Maybe they had fish farms, I don't know. But they certainly didn't have the kind of technologies available that we have today. And maybe, today, where science is making all kinds of leaps and jumps, whatever, and is able to, let's say in pursuit of a new medicine or a new kind of, salmon that would be cheaper, more robust, rot, after take longer to spoil, something like that. And they're messing with the genome, they're messing with the DNA, they're genetically modifying organisms. If you're going to now use science to crossbreed fish, maybe we should, keep in mind that God said don't do that, because who knows what kind of dangerous force could be unleashed in the world when we mess with the DNA of animals, birds, fish, etc. So the sage Rachava raises a dilemma with regard to one who drives a wagon on the seashore with a goat and a shibuta, which is a certain species of fish together, right? So you got the picture, wagon alongside, let's say, a canal. The goat is pulling the wagon, and it's getting an assist from some kind of large fish in the canal that's helping to pull the wagon, right? So can we do that? Can we? We know that you can't have an ox and a donkey pull a wagon together. You can have an ox and a human pull a wagon together because the laws of animals don't apply to humans. Humans are obviously a different category. So what about a goat and a fish? Can they pull a wagon together, or does that violate the prohibition on diverse kinds working together? So what is the law? Has he violated the prohibition against performing labor with diverse kinds in the same way that one does when plowing with an ox and a donkey together, or not? And the two sides of the question are as follows. Do we say that since the goat does not descend into the sea and the shibuta does not ascend onto the land, that they are not working together at all, and so he has not done anything forbidden? Or perhaps, since in any event, he is now driving the wagon with both of them, he thereby does transgress the prohibition. So Ravina objects to this. But if that is so, that one is liable, then if a person joined wheat and barley together in his hand and sowed the wheat in the land of Israel and the barley outside of the land of Israel, where the prohibition of diverse kinds does not apply to seeds, so too he should be liable. Clearly, however, they are two distinct regions and the seeds are not considered to be mixed together. The sages said in response to the objection, how can these cases be compared? There, in the case of planting diverse kinds of seeds, it is specifically the land of Israel that is the location subject to this obligation, whereas outside of the land of Israel is not a location subject to this obligation. But here, by contrast, in the case of the person driving a wagon, both this location, i.e. the land, and that location, the sea, are locations subject to this obligation of not working these animals together. So consequently, if one works together, two different species, either on the land or in the sea, he is liable. Therefore, the question is a valid one. But what is the answer? We don't know. It was left unresolved, and the chapter ends. We move on to chapter 6. We're on page 55b, and Mishna number 1 here in chapter 6. This chapter will get us more into the laws of damages that are paid when the injury is done through eating or trampling, as well as fire, as we shall see. Now, in the case, Mishna number 1, in the case of one who brought his flock of sheep into the pen and locked the door before it, and locked the door before the herd, the flock, and locked the door before it in a manner that is appropriate. And despite this, sheep went out and caused damage in another person's field by eating produce or trampling it. The owner is exempt since he safeguarded the animals appropriately, right? He locked the door. If he did not lock the door before the sheep in a manner that is appropriate, and the sheep went out and caused damage, well, then the owner is liable since his negligence led to the damage. If the owner locked the door appropriately, but the wall of the pen was breached at night, or bandits breached it, and sheep subsequently went out and caused damage by eating or trampling, the owner of the sheep is exempt from liability, right? So we see it's very much a reasonableness standard. Did he take appropriate measures to keep his sheep from going out and eating or trampling his neighbor's produce? If he did, then he's not liable if something, some circumstance beyond his control caused the sheep to get out. But if he was negligent, if he didn't take proper measures to safeguard his sheep from going out, then he is going to be liable. All right, very, very logical seeming law. If the owner left the animal in the sun, causing it to suffer, or if he conveyed it to a deaf mute, an imbecile, or a minor, who were not able to safeguard it, and the animal went out and caused damage, the owner is liable because he was negligent. If the owner conveyed the animal to a shepherd to care for it, then the shepherd enters in his place, and he is the one responsible for the damage. Think about that responsibility, right? The owner, he's a rich guy, has a big flock of sheep. He hires, a paid worker to be the shepherd of the sheep. If the shepherd messes up and the sheep get out and do damage on the neighbor's land, the shepherd is personally responsible for that. If the animal fell into a garden and derives benefit from produce there, its owner pays for the benefit that it derives and not for other damage caused. If the animal descended into the garden in its usual manner and caused damage there, its owner pays for what it damaged, right? So same type of principle that if something weird happened and your sheep falls into, unpredictably falls into the neighbor's property and does damage, then you only have to pay for what it eats, but not for damage that it does. On the other hand, if your sheep enters somebody else's property in the normal way, then you have to pay for what it ate and for any damage that it does because you didn't safeguard it properly. How does the court appraise the value of the damage when the owner pays for what it damaged? The court appraises a large piece of land with an area required for sowing 1 sa of seed, which is known as a base sa, in that field, including the garden bed in which the damage took place. And this appraisal includes how much it was worth before the animal damaged it and how much it is worth now. And the owner must pay the difference. So the court appraises not only the garden bed that was eaten or trampled, rather the depreciation in value of the bed as part of the surrounding area. And this results in a smaller payment, right? So you could say, well, it got into the garden bed, and that garden bed, produces, let's say $100 worth of tomatoes in the fall, and now it's only going to produce $50 worth of tomatoes, so the damage is $50, right? But if you say, well, that garden bed is part of, somebody's 1 acre property in Beverly Hills, and that whole property is worth $5 million. And now that there's been this damage done to the tomato bed, it's worth like, $4.999 million. I mean, the difference is so slight that it's almost not measurable, right? And so that's why you're going to end up with a smaller payment when you evaluate damages in this way. Now, Rabbi Shimon says this principle of appraisal applies only in a case where the animal ate unripe produce. But if it ate ripe produce, then the owner does pay the value of the ripe produce. Therefore, if it ate 1 sa of produce, he pays for 1 sa, and if it ate 2 sa, he pays for 2 sa. That's the Mishnah. Here's the Gemara. The Gemara clarifies the definition of locking the door in a manner that is appropriate. So the sages taught what is considered locking in a manner that is appropriate and what is considered locking in a manner that is not appropriate. If one locked the door such that it is able to withstand the typical wind without collapsing or opening, this is appropriate. Whereas if he locked the door such that it is unable to withstand the typical wind, then this is inappropriate. So Rabbi Mani Bar Patash said, who is the Tana, the rabbi of the Mishnaic period, who taught with regard to animals that are forewarned that it is sufficient for the owner to provide only reduced safeguarding, right? So as opposed, which is interesting, like you're more on the hook for an innocuous animal if you didn't, no matter how you safeguarded it, if your innocuous animal gores, you're going to be responsible for half the damages. But with respect to a forewarned animal, even as long as you put up some kind of safeguarding, you're going to be exempt from paying that full damages. Now, as we learned earlier when we covered this, you're still liable for the half damages that an innocuous ox would result in. But for that second half that you have to pay for a forewarned ox, you don't have to pay it if there was at least some safeguarding, even if it was not superior safeguarding. And that is the law, and that's according to Rabbi Yehuda, as we will hear. Now that's with regard to goring, and it turns out that with regard to eating and trampling, not quite the same, but similar. Now, since the Mishnah, our Mishnah now deals with damage categorized as eating or trampling, for which all animals are considered forewarned, so it must be in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. As we learned in a Mishnah on page 45b, if the owner of an ox tied it with reins to a fence or locked the gate before it in a manner that is appropriate, but nevertheless the ox went out and caused damage, whether the animal is innocuous or forewarned, the owner is liable because this is not considered sufficient precaution to prevent damage. That's a statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda will disagree. Rabbi Yehuda says that if the ox is innocuous, the owner is liable even if he safeguarded it appropriately, since the Torah does not limit the required safeguarding for an innocuous animal. If your innocuous ox causes damage, you owe half the value of the damages. Doesn't matter what kind of safeguarding you did. But if the ox is a muad, forewarned, the owner is exempt from payment of damages. That second half, as it is stated in the verse describing the liability for damage caused by a forewarned animal, and the owner has not secured it with respect to the muad. And this ox that was tied with reins or behind a locked gate was secured, even if it wasn't, superior safeguarding. And Rabbi Eliezer says, this is a third view, a forewarned ox has no sufficient safeguarding at all other than slaughtering it with a knife. Now that's with regard to goring, right, which is very dangerous. So according to this Mishnah, what we care about is that Rabbi Yehuda maintains that reduced safeguarding is sufficient to render exempt from liability the owner of an ox that is forewarned. And with respect to eating and trampling, all animals are considered forewarned. There is no innocuous animal with respect to eating and trampling because it is the way of animals to eat what's in front of it or to walk without noticing what it's walking over. So the Gemara answers, you can even say that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who holds that the owner of a forewarned ox is liable even if he provides only reduced safeguarding. Although animals are considered forewarned with regard to eating and trampling, one cannot apply to them a law stated with regard to an animal that is forewarned with regard to goring, which is dangerous. The law is different with regard to eating and trampling, since the Torah limited the required standard of safeguarding for them. As the Amora, Rabbi Elazar says, and some say it was taught in a Baraisa, there are 4 matters for which the Torah limited their required standard of safeguarding. And these are pit and fire, eating and trampling. Now, where does the Torah limit the required standard of safeguarding with regard to the category of pit? as it is written, if a man shall open a pit, or if a man shall dig a pit and not cover it, and an ox or a donkey fall therein, the owner of the pit shall pay. And one can infer, but if he covered it, he is exempt from liability, even though it is possible that the pit would become uncovered in the future. So the Torah limits his liability as long as he does some safeguarding. Where does the Torah limit the required standard of safeguarding with regard to the category of fire? As it is written, the one who kindled the fire shall pay compensation, which is interpreted to mean that one is exempt from liability unless he acts in a manner that is similar to actively kindling the fire in another person's property by being negligent. So if you're taking normal precautions that your fire shouldn't spread, you're not going to be liable if it does, because that's, circumstances beyond your control. Now, where does the Torah limit the required standard of safeguarding with regard to the category of eating? As it is written, if a man causes a field or vineyard to be eaten, and he set his animal loose, and it feed in the field of another. So this indicates that the owner does not bear liability unless he acts in a manner that is similar to causing his animal to feed there by being negligent. If he took some precautions that his animal shouldn't get into his neighbor's field, he's going to be exempt. Now, where does the Torah limit the required standard of safeguarding with regard to the category of trampling? As it is written, if a man causes a field or vineyard to be eaten, and he set his animal loose, and it feed in the field of another. And this indicates that the owner is not liable unless he acts in a manner that is similar to setting his animal loose. As long as he's trying not to do that, he won't be liable. And it is taught in a baraisa with regard to the term v'shilach. This is referring to damage by trampling. And similarly, the verse states that send forth mishalache, the feet of the ox and the donkey. In Isaiah 32:20, with regard to the term uvier, this is referring to damage by eating, and similarly the verse states, as one consumes with the tooth until it be all gone, from 1 Kings 14:10. So evidently the reason for the owner's liability is specifically that he acted in a manner that is similar to setting the animal loose or causing it to feed. So one can infer, but if he did not act in such a negligent manner, even if he provided only minimal safeguarding, he is not liable. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. So Rabbah said the wording of the Mishnah is also precise, as it taught the law specifically with regard to sheep. And this raises the question, since we have been dealing with cases involving an ox in all the previous Mishnayos in this tractate, then let the Mishnah also teach the law with regard to an ox. What is different in this Mishnah that it teaches the case of sheep? Is it not because the Torah limited its requirements specifically with regard to the safeguarding against damage that is more likely to be caused by sheep? Do sheep gore? No, they do not, right? So we're talking about more an animal that damages through eating or trampling, since sheep are unlikely to gore. If so, the wording of the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who holds that a reduced level of supervision is sufficient only with regard to eating and trampling, but not goring. And the Gemara rejects this. One cannot necessarily derive from the wording of the Mishnah that it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Perhaps the Mishnah specifically uses the case of sheep to teach the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that minimal safeguarding is enough to escape liability if your animal gets away and eats or tramples. Why? Because if it would have used an example of an ox here, one might have thought that it also includes damage caused by goring, about which it is not written in the Torah that reduced supervision is sufficient. Therefore, the Mishnah specifically uses the example of sheep to indicate damage caused by eating and trampling, about which it is written that reduced supervision is sufficient. And it teaches us that only with regard to eating and trampling, for which animals are considered forewarned from the outset, that reduced supervision is sufficient according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And the Gemara concludes that this is a valid reading of the Mishnah, and one may learn from it that the Mishnah may even be in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, that's what we've got for today. Let's take some questions. Sounds like there were a bunch of questions, but Nina just gave me the number that I can answer before we got to get going. Okay, so Tom says, a biologist would interpret that any species that can be crossbred with another is perhaps not a completely different species. Yeah, but I mean, I don't think anyone would argue that a horse and a donkey, which can produce a mule, but the mule is sterile, would say that they're not different species, right? Same with you can breed a lion and a tiger, right? They're called ligers, right? I don't know if they're sterile or not, but they are problematic animals, right? As sadly the very famous lion tamer found out. So I think just that I think the fact that the Torah says you can't do this is because it is possible to do, but it is inappropriate to do. So, and I think in terms of biologists and how they would approach it, the fact is they're not changing the taxonomy to say that lions and tigers are the same species, even though they can be crossbred. So I'm just not sure I would agree. I think it is interesting that this potential exists, but I think that like so many things that are around us, God said, look, there's all kinds of things that are possible in this world, and you're not allowed to do all of them. And you have to not do that, and you have to know why you're not doing it. Namely, because I said so, I being God. Joseph, do the sages ever use kal v'chomer inference from the prohibition on crossbreeding or unequally yoked animals to make law about interfaith marriage? I haven't heard that. How much more so? I haven't heard that, and I think the reason I haven't heard that is because of what we just said, right? That why is it that you're prohibited to yoke an ox and a donkey together, but you can have a human pull alongside an ox, right? You don't extend that prohibition to the idea of an animal and a human pulling together. That's permitted because a human's a totally different category. On the other hand, obviously a human and a beast cannot have sex. That's an abomination that is explicitly prohibited. But this idea that you have to, mate with your own kind, we would not extend that to saying that, and that's why Jews have to, marry only each other, because Jews are not a different species, right? They're a different tribe, but all human beings are the same species. So you wouldn't extend that kind of kal v'chomer logic into that area the way I read it. Sharon, is there any means of compensation to the farmer when the owner of the sheep is determined to be not responsible, right? So she's saying that if the owner of the sheep took proper precautions and his sheep went out and ate or trampled in the neighbor's field, then we don't assess liability for that. And what we're saying as well, is unfortunate circumstance, act of God. It's like there was a hailstorm and that damaged your field. In this case, it's just an unexpected eventuality that those sheep got out. But it does sound like, right? I think it says that you do have to pay for what you ate. Right, you're just exempt from damages to the field. Right? Didn't it say that? Didn't we say that you? I'm just not seeing it quickly. Yeah, right. So if it fell into a garden and derives benefit, you pay for the benefit, but not for other damage. So there is that compensation, right? So whatever the sheep actually ate that filled their bellies, you have to pay for that. The degree of damage might be far greater than the amount of food the sheep ingested because of the trampling. But at least you have that compensation. A few other questions. Sharon says, does the prohibition also apply to crossbreeding plants or trees? Many fruit varieties have been the result of cross-pollination. That's a great question. I don't know the answer. We can't grow wheat in a vineyard, right? We know that. But there is grafting. I know that grafting comes up in the Talmud. And so if you graft a different species onto a plant, I just don't know what the law is on that. I can't answer. I don't know offhand. Sharon, like the wording of the fourth commandment about Shabbos, couldn't the words be both said on the initial commandments, but the people only heard what they were capable of hearing at that time, but that both were spoken the first time? That is a great point, and I think that's why the sage who was asked said, I don't know, right? I think that he was saying, I'm not sure if those words were added into the second tablets and weren't present in the first tablets. I don't know, right? And that's why I would say that he's saying I don't know, because perhaps what you're saying, Sharon, is exactly right. All the words were on the first set of tablets, but they were not capable of hearing them. In fact, when the first commandments were given, right, the people got to I am the Lord your God. That experience was so overwhelming that they said, Moses, if God keeps talking, we're going to die. Please, you take dictation for us. And that's when he comes back with the first set of tablets. So maybe God spoke those words, but God knew that they shouldn't be included in the commandments. Maybe God put those in the tablets, but it didn't get recorded. That's exactly where the ambiguity lies, that he didn't want to answer, even though he knows very well what it says in the Torah. He wasn't sure what the Midrash was, what the tradition holds about what was included and what wasn't. And finally, Joseph, does live long in the land mean individuals or all Israel? Such a good question. Such a good question. We have a tradition that Acher, right, Elisha ben Abuya, the sage who went bad because he saw a father say to his son, please go collect the eggs from that nest, shoo away the mother bird. Right? And so these are understood to be the hardest and easiest commandments in the Torah to observe properly, right? Shooing away a mother bird when you pull the eggs out of the nest. I mean, what could be easier? Showing proper respect to your parents is something that, it's so difficult to really do, right? As much as we love our parents and we're nice to our parents, we don't go completely out of our way to honor them the way that we should. But at any rate, this father asked the boy to do that. The boy climbed the ladder, fell off the ladder, and died. Right? And so that's when Elisha ben Abuya said, you know what? Those are the two commandments that it says, so you will live long. So then he just gave up on the whole Torah, and he went bad. And he even helped the Romans persecute the Jews. Very sad story. So that would suggest that so that it will be good for you and so that you will live long in the land is a national promise and not an individual promise. And that squares with the whole idea that if there was a quid pro quo, that every time we fulfilled a commandment, you'd have an immediate reward. And every time you transgressed a commandment, there would be an immediate punishment. So then God's presence would be obvious to everybody. God wouldn't be hidden in this world, even if he wasn't talking to us constantly. The language of events would be so obvious that everybody would just, follow commandments all day long, because otherwise you'd be immediately whipped for it, right? And that wouldn't be a world in which it takes faith and study and personal growth to fulfill the Torah, right? That's why we say, or at least why I say, that this whole universe was created to be a place where God's presence is hidden and where people can, rationally suggest, there was a big bang and there's laws of physics and chemistry, and that explains everything. And as for the fact that there was an, unbelievable amount of matter bursting into existence at the time of the Big Bang, enough to, create billions and billions of stars, and it came out of nothing. Scientists understand that, even if I don't, right? But it just allows people to believe in other things, to be atheists, to be whatever they want to do, and to choose to come to God if they want to or if they don't, right? But God nevertheless says that as a nation, the more the Jews follow the commandments, the more success they will have. And indeed, while the Jews as a people were cleaving to Torah, it was beautiful in the Holy Land. And over time, the spiritual level dropped, and then we lost it. And somehow we're back in Israel. And you can't say that the Jewish people have reached such a lofty spiritual state. I mean, sadly, so many Jews in the world are disconnected from Torah. But there's also the belief that we have suffered so much for so many thousands of years that this modern state of Israel, which is a secular state, but includes much piety, much more piety possible in the land of Israel than was possible when others ruled it, that this is the dawning of the age of Mashiach, right? It's the germination of that time, and that's why the Jews are back with sovereignty in the land of Israel. And perhaps with God's help, we can all inspire and help each other to rise spiritually as a nation, so that it will be good for us and our days will be lengthened in the land of Israel. And jump to a whole other level with the coming of Mashiach. May it be soon. We say Amen. Love you all. Have a great day. And look forward to learning with you tomorrow, Thursday, at the regular time.